As the affordable housing crisis continues to worsen all across the country, more and more people are unfortunately getting pushed out of apartments and they're ending up in their cars. And as a result, in the last 5 years, dozens of parking lots specifically designed for people living in their cars have opened from Pennsylvania to the Pacific Northwest. And I want to highlight some of the specific examples of people who are doing their best, they're working hard, but they're just unable to afford basic housing. So 3 years ago, a CBS report shined light on how many Seattle residents were living in their cars. And since then, the situation has only gotten worse. Take a look.
Aaron's day begins in darkness.
You do what you need to do to get through a given day. You get rest when you can.
Today, he's facing a cold rain and a 2-hour commute by scooter and bus to his job at the post office.
You just keep going through the process of trying to get into better circumstances.
And when he's done, this is home.
He's right there. I think he just came in.
Aaron, his wife Celia, and their 2 children have lived in this parking lot outside of Seattle for the past 9 months. Aaron makes $17 an hour, often too much money to qualify for public housing assistance.
I reached a point where I really didn't see any hope for our situation.
That sense of hopelessness led Aaron to contemplate suicide as a way to give his family a better life.
So last week, the New York Times wrote a piece specifically about so-called mobile homeless. So these are people who can't afford housing. They earn too little to afford rent, but too much to receive government assistance. So they get pushed into living in their cars. Chrystal Audet is one of the people that was highlighted in this reporting. So she and her 26-year-old daughter live in her 8-year-old Ford Fusion in a parking lot. Now, Ford Fusions are not large cars. They're actually very small, compact cars. This is in Kirkland, Washington, the same area where that CBS News report came from. Audet, 49, earns over $72,000 a year as a social worker for the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. But a combination of bad luck, bad debt, and a bad credit score priced her out of her apartment in Bellevue, another suburb of Seattle, one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. So rent is up 21% in 2023 compared to just 2 years ago, 2021. Audet was receiving medical bills in the thousands for her Crohn's disease. So compounding the affordable housing crisis is our healthcare crisis. She missed 2 rent payments and then the landlord decided to raise the rent by $248 a month. She obviously could not afford that. With an eviction looming, she put her furniture in storage and began essentially packing her sedan in a parking lot or parking her sedan out inside a parking lot outside of a church in Kirkland, one of now 12 such parking lots in Washington State. Each morning, she used a portable toilet to get ready for work. Then commuted to the downtown Seattle office of the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, where she spent her day sitting behind a plexiglass partition across from some of the city's most destitute residents. Look, I'm highlighting these stories as well, specifically to note that these are people who have full-time jobs. They're not, and they're full-time jobs in positions that you need degrees for, right? This is a woman who went to school, she's now a social worker. She's earning $72,000 a year, which sounds like good money, except the housing crisis is so bad that that's not enough money to afford an apartment, especially with her medical bills, throwing her in debt and putting her in this hole that she's having a difficult time climbing out of.
Yeah, so there's one other giant problem here, which is that once they run into credit problems, any money, they wind up having to borrow money, they don't have a choice, but any money they borrow is usually at insane rates. So she's borrowing at 29%. Like no rich person would ever borrow at 29%. That's a path to financial destruction, but they don't have to borrow at 29%. It creates a vicious cycle. Because, and I get the reasoning behind it. If you're a poor credit risk, then people are going to lose more money. They have to charge higher interest rates to make up for it. But we're letting them charge too much interest rates. This used to be a crime called loan sharking. But since now everything is legal, you just get like gangsters to put on suits and a tie and say, oh, heroin's now Oxycontin, and loan sharking is now payday loan rates, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So they're getting robbed by those folks as well. So these are the people we should help most. They should be first on the list. Now, why? We should try to help everybody, of course. But guys, like for example, in LA, 60% of the homeless live in their cars. Now, and LA is a super expensive city, and that's part of the reason why they're living in their cars. But they're not living on the street, and they're not going around refusing help. A lot of the people on the streets refuse help. Why? Because they're having mental health problems, or they're having addiction issues, and they want the quote unquote freedom to be able to stay on the streets and take drugs. That doesn't apply to everyone on the streets, but it does apply, unfortunately, to a big number, right? And so the advocates for homelessness go around saying, no, those people should have freedom. That's not a thing. No, they need help. Freedom's not their issue. Help is their issue, right? But for the people that are in their cars, they're not refusing any help.
No, they want the help.
They want the help.
And they take the help, and I'm happy to report that luckily, Audet did receive some help. Unfortunately, not enough from the federal government. That hasn't been much help at all. But apparently, she's now in a small apartment with her daughter thanks to help from some housing advocates. So there are housing activists that are fantastic, and they do help get people who want the help into housing. And she also got some financial assistance from the church. So her church doing some wonderful things, assisting her in getting into an apartment. But I just want to really highlight, Cenk, what the government's response to this crisis has been so far, which is let's open up some parking lots so they can park their cars and live out of their cars. No, that is not a solution. I'm sorry, it's not even close. Look, homelessness is actually a complex problem, okay? Ignore what anyone on both sides of the political aisle, the extremes, have to say because they want to simplify it. It is not simple. There are some people who are just, they're priced out of the market. They have no other choice, so they're living in their cars, but they're not dealing with any other issue. They just desperately want to get into housing. Then there are people who have severe mental health issues, and you have to deal with that issue in order to eventually get them into permanent housing. And then there are people who have serious drug addiction. They're not able to think correctly about their situation. They need a different form of help. They need rehabilitation. So like the way that we've been handling this issue has been driving me so crazy because people want to simplify it, okay? No, housing first, housing first. Yes, for some, housing first, absolutely. For Audet, housing first, absolutely. But it doesn't work for everyone because there are other underlying issues. And finally, we need to build more housing. The reason why the prices have gone up and skyrocketed is because as we continue to increase our population, we don't have enough places for people to live. Yeah. So build it.
And in places like LA, you might see a lot of construction and go, well, it seems like they're building a lot. No, they generally are building giant, really expensive high rises, okay? Why? Because those pay a lot, so they're gonna make a lot of money. If they build affordable housing, they're not gonna make as much money. So that's why the government needs to come in with incentives and disincentives instead of going, oh, don't worry guys, we built a lot, more for the rich. That's not helping the situation at all. Those folks in their cars are both the most likely to accept help and to greatly benefit from the help, because they're trying to help themselves. They just need a hand up for a second. So let's deal with those guys first, because it's gonna be the most effective, the most efficient, and you can get, different cities have different percentages, but you can help about half the homeless with a little bit. And instead, we're having wars and battles over how much freedom the people with massive drug addictions should have to roam through our streets. That is totally misdirected if you want to help solve homelessness.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.